Hey guys, welcome to the next episode of the Bionicle Inspiration Series. In this episode, we're going to be taking a look at Self MOCs for the third time. The first episode sort of focused more on Self MOCs as a whole, what it specifically means to make a Self MOC, what it is. The second Self MOC episode focused on Self MOCs, just different versions of Self MOCs for that matter. And this episode is going to focus on kind of the progression of Self MOCs. One thing that's really cool about building a Self MOC is that they kind of evolve with you. And kind of to elaborate more on that, I first need to discuss, well, what is a Self MOC? A Self MOC is kind of a lot of different things, to be quite honest with you. It's kind of a build that is sort of a form of like a self-expression, of like a self-portrait, that sort of thing. It's kind of making you as a Bionicle character, but also it can, kind of not be that. It can also just be kind of a mascot for you as a Lego builder. It can kind of just represent your building style. It could even just be a character that you really like, but an original character. A Self MOC isn't necessarily, I really like Tahu, I'm gonna have Tahu be my Self MOC. That's not quite what a Self MOC is. It's a unique character, an individual character, something that in some way represents you. It's that sort of thing. And so in this episode, we're going to talk about how a lot of different builders have advanced their Self MOC over the years, and kind of how that can reflect them in some way, and hopefully as a result that can inspire you with some of your Self MOCs, whether that means you want to revamp your old one, or you're looking to make your very own Self MOC and you've never made one before. This is something to consider, that, over time that thing's going to change, so there's no reason that it needs to be perfect right now, because heck, you can make version 2, 3, and 4 as your building style improves, and that Self MOC will improve too, and it'll be awesome. So we will begin with our first MOC, but before we do, just a little quick disclaimer, I'm actually recording this with a brand new microphone. Quote unquote brand new, it's actually not, it's actually the exact same microphone that I had before, but this is a brand new one that I bought online. My old one, like the little stem of it, or whatever you want to call it, broke, so it was really uncomfortable and cumbersome to wear. You might have been hearing in past episodes a little like clunking and clanking. That's because I was trying to balance the headset on my head. So this new one is now firmly resting on my ears and is so comfy and so lovely, but it's the exact same microphone, so there shouldn't be an audio quality difference, but I'm interested to know if anyone notices anything. So let me know if you do. Anyway, besides the point, unrelated, let's start with the first MOC by Dylan Meaves and his Self MOC, Sparky the Lightning Warrior. So this is version 1, we'll be going to version 2 a little bit later, but this version 1 was actually made in 2012, and the current version was only recently posted in 2018, so it is a very old character, which is really cool to see that character being brought back. So we take a look at this first MOC here. It's a very simple design, mainly using CCBS frames and some of the old Ben 10 legs and old G1 Bionicle legs there. It's a very simplistic design, but honestly, there's nothing wrong with that. The character still looks fantastic. And heck, this MOC was built back in 2012, and Dylan was a completely different builder back then to what he is now. And you yourself, if you're building a Self MOC, you'll be a completely different builder when you start building to versus where you'll be in many years' time. And there's literally nothing wrong with building something simple now, because heck, at least you're building something. In future, you can expand on it and continue it to grow, build something that reflects your building style. But something I think is even cooler about the fact that this is a simple MOC is the fact that it still looks super cool despite the fact that there's nothing major going on with it. But little tiny things make this MOC really pop and really make it sort of stand out. We see these Ben 10 pieces here. Now, these came on Jet Ray, I believe he was called, one of the Ben 10 CCBS sets that we got ages ago. And this is a really unique little kind of cloth piece here. And kind of adding it here to kind of create this really unique shape on Sparky's torso here is really unique and really cool to see. And it really makes this MOC pop. It really introduces a really interesting visual element to this, which, makes it stand out, makes it look really, really cool. We've also got this disc here that's kind of being placed here onto the arm, which I think is just kind of held in there. It's not actually properly placed, but it looks really cool, and it's just another little sort of accent point there. And it really makes this sort of more simplistic design, really pop. It looks really cool. So let's take a look at the current version from 2018, which is still called Sparky, but is a whole lot different. So Dylan's done something really cool here. Before he used the yellow How that came with the Mictoran Julla, and now he's instead used a Shapeways custom 3D printed How mask here. So it's kind of got a slightly different look to it, but it's still more or less the same How to a degree. And so it's really interesting seeing that. Obviously this is a more refined, awesome looking version of this MOC, and so as a result, he's kind of got a more refined, awesome looking version of that mask. Sure, it's custom, but it's still really cool. And look, to be honest, this MOC would have worked just as well having that original Bionicle mask in there. So if you're not someone who really wants to use any kind of custom stuff on your MOC, you really don't have to. But I still think that's a really interesting idea and an interesting take on introducing a sort of more custom element into the MOC to kind of reflect this newer upgraded style. Speaking of newer and upgraded styles here, this Ben 10 cloth piece has been replaced with some sort of yellow Lego cloth piece. I'm not too sure specifically what cloth piece that is. I think it might be custom as well, but besides the point, you still get that beautiful shape that the original had, and again, it looks so unique and so awesome. It really makes this MOC pop. And then we've taken a lot of the original, very simplistic designs and expanded upon them. You know, these legs here are this beautiful custom mesh of tires and CCBS shells and things like that. And then again, we actually see more sort of simplistic designs. You take a look at the hands here. They're very simple, but very effective, and it creates a fantastic looking result overall. It's just really cool to see. Just nice to see these little subtle changes and these subtle advances that very much reflect how Dylan has progressed as an AFOL over time. Really cool to see. And I guess that's something to consider with your own Self MOCs, is how have you as a builder grown over the years, and does your Self MOC reflect that in any way? By no means do you have to change your Self MOC if you don't want to, but if you're looking to revamp it, or maybe it's been a few years and you want to take another stab at it, have a think about how your building style has progressed over time, and if you're not too sure, ask around. Some people might have some input on that, and maybe you can sort of work some of those elements into your new and improved Self MOC. Speaking of new and improved Self MOC, let's move on to the next MOC, which is by Mittens and is called Ventum. So if we're going to be talking about how MOCs have progressed, I think this is a brilliant example of that, because Ventum has over 10 different versions, and I'm going to be covering all of them. So we'll have a little bit of a chat about the pretty major progression that's been happening with this MOC. So we take a look at version 1. Interesting to note there's some more blurrier photos here, and his photography improves, which again is nothing to do with the MOC itself, but I think that's just kind of cool to see that even the presentation of his MOCs has improved over time, so that's really cool to see. But taking a look at this MOC as a whole, it's a sort of more simplistic build to a degree. It has that very sort of typical Toa look to it. You got kind of things like these Partunuva claw pieces, and then those Vizirac feet there for the lower legs there. That's something that you see a lot on Toa designs, surprisingly. So a lot of sort of typical tropes there for a sort of more traditional Toa build, especially for one made in the early 2010s, as this MOC was made in January of 2012. There you go. So yeah, it's a sort of more early MOC pages style, or just a sort of general older Toa style look to it, which is cool. Nothing wrong with that at all. Heading into version 2, pretty much the same kind of look to it, but very little subtle fixes in little areas of the MOC. We see that his torso has been changed and kind of adding a bit more detail there. He's also given the MOC a cape now, which is a new little addition there, which looks nice. And I think that's interesting. We don't see much of a jump between this version and the last, although his photography has improved, so nice work. That was a quick jump so quickly into the building process here. But it's nice to know that you can, if you're happy with it, keep the exact same MOC, but just make little tiny tweaks. Maybe you're not quite satisfied with how the torso looks, so you just change around a couple pieces and boom, you fixed it. I think that's nice to see. And just for a note, this MOC was made in March of 2012, so only a few months difference here, but some nice little details that managed to round it off a little bit more. Let's take a look into version 3 of Ventum, which was made in May of 2012, so already heaps of different things being made to it. And I think that's actually a nice lesson in that. You can easily build a MOC, post it, be happy with it, and over time, you're probably going to want to make a few little changes here and there, and there's nothing wrong with that. Or, maybe you're not totally satisfied with a MOC, well, just post it anyway, get it done, put it away, and you can always revisit it later. Rather make something than nothing, you know what I mean? You know what I'm saying? You feel me? You feel me? So this MOC really expands upon the use of teal. We start to see a few more teal parts being used here, specifically on the lower legs there, so it's nice to see that color is being introduced a little bit more, because it was quite sparse on some of the other versions, so that's kind of being played with a little bit more here. And again, we see relatively the same sort of design, except a few more kind of greebles and little tiny additions are being made. And then the cape has been sort of reimagined. I believe it's a little bit shorter on this MOC, and it's kind of flowing more onto the front of the MOC, kind of over his shoulder and things like that. So again, little stylistic changes, but they're still doing a fair bit to the MOC, and that's nice to see. We then take a look at version 4, which was made in October of 2012. Pretty much the same thing, not too much here. And then we take a look at version 4.5, which was made in February of 2013. And funny to note how he was saying back here that he thinks this MOC is absolutely perfect, and yet we're not even halfway through with the revision. So heck, that's another thing to remember too. As your building style changes, you're going to think something is amazing then, and later on you're going to be like, man, look how much I've grown. I thought this was amazing then. Look at it now. It's even better. So know that you're always going to grow, even if you think you've reached your peak. Isn't that cool? Anyway, so in version 4.5, again, a lot more sort of greebling throughout. We've completely now removed all of the silver on the MOC, so he's sort of starting to kind of refine his color schemes, which is really cool to see. He's also starting to work on textures. Things are a little bit less greebled like we were seeing before. There's still sort of a little bit of that there, but through, kind of playing a little bit more, we're starting to see a lot more growth with the MOC. He's factoring in some more kind of, I guess, quote-unquote complex techniques like color blocking and kind of color consistency and texture consistency, that sort of thing. Stuff that we've spoken about in past episodes of the Bionicle Inspiration series, but all that stuff is starting to be introduced here in version 4.5. Let us now move on to version 5 of the MOC, in which he has completely removed all of the teal, and I think I remember reading a comment as I was looking through these. I think apparently his teal pieces broke. The teal mutter feet that he had on the MOC, for some reason, they snapped. And so, as a result, he removed all the teal. So interesting to note that too, maybe the specific pieces you wanted to have broke, or maybe that's an opportunity to completely recolor your Self MOC in some fashion. Who knows? It's possibly a surprising but interesting way to get inspired. Something else that I think is really cool about this is there's a brand new foot design as a result of that. And we also get this introduction into some of the trans blue on this MOC. So kind of subtly keeping that teal in there, but slightly changing it and making it more kind of the trans light blue, which is close to the teal, but not quite. But sorry, as I was saying about those feet there, it's really interesting how he's experimenting and playing with that. And honestly, so far through all of these different versions that we've seen so far, there's been a lot of experimentation, play, refining, continuing to work on, all that sort of stuff. And I think that's always important with any MOC you're building, whether it's a Self MOC or not. Never be afraid to make some subtle adjustments, just to experiment and play. We had that specific Mudderfoot design for so long, and then he changed it up quite drastically with this design here. He could have easily done black Mudder feet with this, but Ventum went, no, I'm going to try something super cool and make some custom feet. So try that out on your stuff, experiment, play, see if it works. If it doesn't, oh well, you gave it a go, you took a risk, and it didn't work. High five, you took a risk, good job, you at least gave it a go. And often that's how some of the best ideas are born. You go, is this going to work? I don't know, let's find out. You dive right in, turns out it does, heck yeah. Or turns out it doesn't. Oh well, we'll try something else now. We then move on to version 6, and boom, what a massive change. Now, it's very, very primarily white MOC with little green subtle highlights there. So that's pretty interesting. And if we're talking about how Self MOCs can very much reflect personality, perhaps, I'm not sure. This MOC was made in 2013, October 2013. Perhaps there was a sort of big defining moment in good old Mittens' life. Perhaps he sort of matured a bit more. Who knows? Anything could have happened. And maybe your Self MOC reflects that. Maybe you yourself, you feel like you've grown so much as a person over the course of a few months or a year or something. And if your Self MOC reflects you in a very interesting, unique way, well, maybe that's time to revamp your Self MOC to reflect the new you. Then this version here is not actually labeled as a specific version number. It actually says version 1, so I don't quite know what that means. But this one had wings, so pretty much the same sort of design that we saw before, but introducing a wing design to this MOC. I think it's really interesting, really simple, using those Chima wing pieces there. Pretty cool, I quite like that. So interesting progression there, just a subtle little addition, but it does a lot to the MOC, it's pretty cool. And I think 2013, I might be wrong here, I think that's when Chima sets actually came out. So it's also even cooler at that time, he was experimenting with some of those newer pieces, seeing how they worked with Bionicle. So never be afraid to do that as well, experiment and play with new stuff, always fun. Then we take a look at version 7. Again, another drastic change. We've got rid of a lot of that white, but we've kept a little bit of that white in there. And now he's got this sort of black and white color scheme with little hints of green. No, that's not green. The background's green. He's got little hints of trans light blue throughout. And now he's also introduced a custom painted mask, which looks fantastic. Absolutely love what he's done with that there. And again, that's something else to consider. Maybe you want to do some custom elements with your MOC. Maybe you've been inspired by something and the visual image in your head that you have doesn't quite match the look that LEGO can provide. So maybe you want to sort of have a bit of a think about some custom painted pieces or some custom pieces. We talked about shapeways before, or this mask, which I believe would probably be a mold art mask. You could look into some of those different avenues, and maybe that's the way to perfectly match the image that's in your head, or the specific look that you're after. Maybe that's the way to achieve it. Another thing here that I think is really cool, in earlier versions we saw on the upper arms that he specifically used Rakshi heads there to achieve that look, and this has now been reintroduced on this version. So nothing wrong with taking a look at some of the older versions of that MOC and going, ooh, okay, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to reintroduce this, but I'm going to update it and do it in a new way, because you've grown as a builder. You're going to be able to look at that design and do it in a new way. Never hurts to kind of take a look at some of those designs and just see what you can do with them now. Oh, and for those of you who are following and interested in that, this mock was built in May 2014. And this version was built in January of 2015, version 8. So we continued to see the refining of that new introduced color scheme of black, white, and trans light blue with that custom mask thrown in there as well. So yeah, we see Mittens really starting to play and kind of refine his textures and refine the style, play along with a lot more of the CCBS parts that he has access to now, and really start to kind of flow more into a more kind of modern style, I guess you would call it, where people have very sort of smooth, organic looks to them, very CCBS heavy. The mock is starting to kind of lend itself more towards that. So this sort of more quote-unquote messy, agreeable style that we saw before is very much kind of being phased out at this point, which is cool to see. Then we move into, this one was made in 2016, and this is Ventum version 9. We go back to that white color scheme with very little black, and now hints of dark red. Again, major changes, nothing wrong with that. Cool to see some new stuff being introduced. And again, like we were seeing before, we see more consistent textures. And he's also starting to play around with some more kind of unique designs, more experimentation and play. Good job, my sir. He has a waistcoat now. He also has this cool sort of new look and foot design, stuff like that. Yeah, he's experimenting, he's playing, he's trying new things out, seeing how they work. And then we see these Rakshi heads up here on the top of the shoulders. So those Rakshi heads we were talking about before have been moved up slightly. So interesting to see that some of those original elements are still there, but they've been moved around and played with a little bit more. Nicely done. And now we finally finish off with version 10, which was made the start of last year, January 10th, 2017. If I've missed a version that's come out after that, I've already covered more than 10. So, meh. This is the final version of Mittens that I know of. Like we were saying before, those textures that he was slowly refining and continuing to work on. Now we see the culmination of that, and there's some very consistent textures throughout this. Very, very nice to see. And again, he's continuing to play with colors. He's considering a little bit of that, it's not quite teal, but it's close to teal, that azure color, which kind of matches the original teal. He's got the black, he's got the white, he's got that old cape back, but this time it's more used as a sort of loincloth waistcoat kind of thing. And he's really starting to continue down the line of that kind of modern, smooth, organic style that he has going on that we've seen in past versions. Very cool to see just how much a Self MOC can change and just how much you can do with experimentation and play. Let us now move on to the final mock, which is by Felix van Lieven, or Felix the Cat as he's also known as, and these are his Self MOCs known as F33. So technically, F33 is what this specific picture is called, but Felix has 3 different versions of his Self MOC here. The original was F33-X2, and the original meaning behind that name, I know this because Felix also lives where I live, and I have met him, and we have built together. The original version of that name is very funny because Fifi is a sort of nickname for his name, Felix, Fifi Felix, and F33-X2 is another way of saying Fifi, but made to sound cool and mecha-like, fitting this sort of robot look. So that was how he made a little play on his Self MOC's name there, F33X2. And then he decided, well, if I've got X2, who's X1? And what about X3? So as a result, he made these other 2 versions of his Self MOC, F33X, F33X2, and F33X3, which is cool, which is really clever, just a fun way to just kind of expand upon that character. And I don't necessarily know how this reflects him in any kind of way, or if this is a specific expansion upon the Self MOC, but I think it's just kind of the sort of loose story of, you know, like F33X is the prototype, and then X2 is the upgrade, and X3 is the sort of like final revised version of the robot if in this sort of made-up robot building world, which is just fun, which is just really cool. So I like that as a concept and as an idea. But speaking of kind of concepts and ideas, something that Felix would often stress when we're building is, you know, maybe you're building this cool-looking torso or arm design or something, and, you know, you kind of can't really find a way to kind of work in a head, and suddenly he goes, I'm going to make it a mech. And I think that's really cool, you know? Nothing wrong with that. If you're kind of struggling with a specific head design or something, screw it, just add an eye onto the torso, and boom, you've got a mech. Which works really well. I think it's something that's definitely something to consider. Do you actually want to make a specific character, a humanoid, or why not consider making some robots, some mechs, much like these mocks? Pretty cool. So in terms of the progression that we talked about here, technically F33X2 was the first version, and then after that he made F33X3, and so he kind of continued certain things across, you know. He introduced this blade arm here. He moved one of the 2 shoulder cannons down, one on the top there sort of more on the back, and then the other as another arm there. And so I think that's kind of interesting, when, like the new iPhone comes out, or, some new model of car or whatever, sometimes features are changed, the location of where those features are changes. And so it's interesting to see how that's kind of translated onto a made-up product robot design here. I think that's kind of cool. New things are introduced. The specific head design there keeps that Borak shield, but the sort of kind of grill just under that where the face is has been sort of refined. The original version sort of is more kind of almost looks sort of like a kind of grill plate is there, where this newer version has this sort of smooth, rounded finish to it, which kind of lends itself to how, every kind of refined version of something becomes sleeker and cooler looking, all that sort of stuff. And then we take a look at the F33X, which is more kind of like a prototype. We see two of these Borak shields here in Keat Orange. And this kind of look is sort of more lending itself to the idea that, the original version had two of those, and then they found a way that they only needed one on the future versions of these robots. And then you also see a whole bunch more wires. You see more slimmed down designs, like the waist is a lot more slim there, but it's also sort of bulkier in certain areas. And, it's kind of nice sort of visual storytelling there that, as the versions were made and progressed, they were able to slim down things or buff things up, that sort of thing. It's just really clever. So he's found really interesting ways to kind of show advances in technology, as well as just advances in his building style, which technically, because he kind of built these out of order, it's not exactly a reflection of his building style, but it's an interesting reflection of character, which is just as important, because with self-mocks, and honestly with any mock, story is often quite important, depending on how interested in a story you are. You don't need to put a story into a mock, but it's something to consider. And it's always something fun to write and do. And so I think the visual storytelling on these mocks is very effective and is a brilliant example of that in a self-mock. So nice work, Felix. That is it for this long self-mock episode. Had a lot to discuss in this one, but hopefully you enjoyed it. If you are interested in submitting some of your own mocks to the show or any of your own theme ideas, you can do so through the following email that you are seeing on your screen right now. There is a link to, or there is that email address is typed out below, so you can copy and paste that. Check out the description for that, and also check out the description for the mocks that you saw in today's episode. Give those guys some love. They're some talented builders. And also, while you're there, be sure to check out the links to my social media, where you can see some of my own stuff. And if you're interested, you can also consider checking out my Patreon page. I very much appreciate that. That's it for this episode. Stay tuned for more. We'll be here next Saturday. Bye for now, guys. I'll see you in the next one. See ya.